You're listening to the Tel Aviv Review here on TLV1. I am Gilad Halpern. Welcome back. I'm now joined here in the studio by Professor Yosef Salmon. He teaches Jewish history at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev and is also author of Do Not Provoke Providence, Orthodoxy in the Grip of Nationalism, which has been recently published by Academic Studies Press. And it explores the history of the rather intricate relationship between Zionism and the Jewish religion. Hello, Professor Salmon. Welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Yeah. The book started very early, 19th century, from Chatam Sofer, who was considered as the most known leader of Orthodoxy in the 19th century in Hungary, but all over also. And it ends with the establishment of the State of Israel.
I'd like to ask you, the thing is that Zionism in general is associated with secularism. It is largely a secularist project. I don't think that any other movement did so much to secularize Jews as Zionism, and yet your contention is that religion is still a very significant part of Zionism, not only in the religious Zionism in modern Orthodoxy in its nationalist form, but all across the board.
I agree, yeah. This is exactly my point. I want to show the changes in the attitude of Orthodoxy towards Zionism. And I found that Orthodoxy supported Zionism at the beginning of it, and then it changed its mind because of what I'm trying to describe in my book, which is secularism, as you said, and all this part of Zionism. What is new about it, in my opinion, is that Orthodoxy was involved very much in the Zionist movement. And it's not correct that secularism was a starting point of the issue.
Mm-hmm. Let's take it one by one. You said that in the beginning, Orthodoxy was relatively positive towards Zionism. I'd like to ask you why, because on the surface, Zionism or any form of Jewish nationalism, especially when it involves the gathering of the exiles and, making Aliyah and establishing some sort of political entity in the land of Israel, could be very easily for Orthodoxy, as it has been for centuries, be interpreted as transgression, as interfering with the divine. So why were they relatively positive towards Zionism in the beginning?
Orthodoxy altogether emerged in the 19th century as a response to secularism. And in their feeling at the beginning, the idea of Zionism is going to help their attitude in the inner fight in the Jewish society.
Because it's another form of isolationism in a way, separating Jews from the general public.
Separating, and it's an identity issue. Mm-hmm. And then what happened that secularism became strong factor in the movement and took over also the leadership of the movement, and then Orthodoxy in a way retreated.
When was it? Around Herzl's time?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this led to the establishment of religious Zionism as a current within the Zionist movement?
Yeah. Religious Zionism is a small part of Orthodoxy, which decided to remain in the movement and not to secede and to go against it. Mm-hmm. But this is only a small part of it. The majority of Orthodoxy left the movement and became an enemy of the movement.
Mm-hmm. And how did the secularists react to that? What did Herzl and his entourage say about? Because it's really very, very harmful to their purpose, isn't it?
No question. But Herzl started to bring Orthodoxy into the movement, and he sent all kinds of emissaries to leaders of Orthodoxy, trying to explain and to convince them. But the secular factor in the movement was very strong. People like Chadam, around the Chadam, Buber, Weizmann, Usishkin, all group of people that were very strong secular, and they were very much against attempts of the Orthodoxy to influence the movement.
Mm-hmm. So it didn't work eventually. They turned their back on Zionism, yet small minority of those Orthodox people remained. And it wasn't just a tactical decision. It had huge ideological ramifications.
Yeah. There is a whole ideology behind it, no question about it. And I don't know, we don't have time now to go into details.
No, tell us briefly about the main differences between the contours of religious Zionism, how they differ in their worldview and in their interpretation of Zionism from secular Zionism on the one hand and the anti-Zionist Orthodoxy on the other.
The small minority, led by Rabbi Reines, he was the head of the Mizrahi movement, believed that the future is on their part. I mean, even if now secularism is a strong factor, it will change in the future. And so they said we have to wait. I mean, we have to believe in the change. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, we have to take part and we have to participate because the Jewish people are in a real trouble now in Europe, and we have to find a solution to the situation.
Mm-hmm. But this is something that the anti-Zionist Orthodox also might be able to say, okay, let's just wait patiently now until all our trouble is gone because, history is on our side, God is on our side. Yeah. Let's just take a deep breath and wait for better times.
They say that because secularism is so strong, it means that the movement, something wrong in the movement, and we don't have to take part with such phenomenon.
Uh-huh. As far as I remember, Herzl famously said, I don't know if it was to Rabbi Reines or to other leaders of Orthodox Zionism, he promised to them that Zionism will have nothing to do with religion. And that is what convinced them to stay, because they treated the national project, at least Herzl did, and the religious project as completely separate. Yeah. But for them, and also if you look back on it, on the passage of time, and as you said, and as we said in the beginning of this conversation, you can't really separate between the national and the religious. So tell us a bit about these efforts. Did they really try to separate and then at some point failed, or from the very beginning they said, okay, the two are one and they're inseparable?
Herzl and his group started to separate, and they argued that we are not Zionism has nothing to do with religion and nothing to do with spirituality. It's just political issue and so on. But as I said before, the group of Russian Zionists, young, very strong, very influential, like Buber, Motzkin, this group, they didn't agree to this point, and they fought against it. And as a matter of fact, they succeeded at the end.
Because they said that Jewish religion is part and parcel of the Zionist enterprise.
No, they said that educating the Jewish people is part of the agenda. This is perhaps even the most important part of it. Mm-hmm. And so everything that is included in education, and clearly in their mind, it's not a religious education, but a secular, modern, Western civilization. Mm-hmm. And this, yeah.
And if we leave perhaps the turn of the century behind in the early stages of Zionism and, move on down the passage of the 20th century, of the decades of the 20th century, we see that overall this worldview prevailed, and perhaps the Buber camp and those people that you just described who were in the secular wing of the Zionist movement and the religious orthodoxy within the Zionist movement had more in common, and it turned out to be, if you look at today's Israel, that they had actually much more in common than it might have seemed at the outset.
As a matter of fact, also in the religious movement, a small minority, some people thought that it's wrong to think that education it's not part of Zionism. Like men like Javits was one of the leaders of that, and other. So the attitude of Highness was not so backed by his own people, and it was a kind of inter-Mizrahi debate all along. And I agree with you that at the end they found, as a matter of fact, they found a kind of solution or a compromise. Mm-hmm. The decision of dividing the religious education from the non-religious education to stream in Zionist education.
When was that? Right from the beginning?
From the beginning. Mm-hmm. From the first conference in Minsk, 1902.
Mm-hmm. But also when it comes to the not just education, but the worldview and the fact that you see the land of Israel for them also as having a religious component, in Jewish sovereignty as having a religious component, is something that is, to me seems like a real ideological and theological innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to understand how it came into being within the matrix of the Zionist forces working together. Because the people who insisted on education from within the secular movement, they didn't really care about the theological implications of their endeavor, did they?
No, they didn't care. But the issue was not just, spiritual to say, but it's all daily life, how to manage the daily life, and to keep the mitzvot or not to keep the mitzvot, and how to educate the kids to do this or to do that. And the non-religious one didn't want this kind of religious education. They wanted that Zionist kids will be westernized. Mm-hmm. As a whole movement looked toward the Western civilization.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that the religious Zionist, Reines and his lot, got this sort of educational autonomy made it possible for them to swallow that pill of westernization or perceived westernization of the Jews within Zionism?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was a whole long discussion, and as a matter of fact, it was one of the most important issues in the Zionist movement, the issue of culture, education, and this kind of subjects. There was various group of different opinions, many more to the right, less to the right, more religious, less religious. Even in the, let's say, Mapai, the historical party Mapai, there was all kind of segments to more religious, less religious. Mm-hmm. If you take, for example, Berl, one of the leaders of Mapai was more kind of
labor movement.
Yeah, labor movement was more kind of traditional in his feeling. Ben-Gurion less, and it was a whole going discussion. And even in the education that was established in the time of even before the state was established, you can find different kind of schools and tendencies, and it's not a kind of very clear-cut situation.
I'd like to ask you about Rabbi Kook.
Yeah.
He was perhaps one of the more influential rabbis, ideological leaders, religious leaders in modern Orthodoxy, in religious Zionism, certainly in the last few decades, perhaps the past half century. But he was active from really the dawn of the 20th century. I'd like to ask you, how influential was he within these circles? Because he wasn't really part of the establishment of religious Zionism back then.
Yes. Rav Kook is a special case, very complicated to explain, because you find in his attitudes kind of contrasting steps that he took. He was not part of the religious Zionism, even not of the Mizrahi movement. He became very popular only later on, much later on. But when he was really the chief rabbi of what we call the Yishuv, in the 20s, in the 30s, he had a real problem, not only with secular Zionism, but with religious Zionism.
Right.
Because he was very strict as far as observant is concerned. He also didn't try very much to solve some of the daily life problem of new settlement.
Would you say that the religious Zionists were less less orthodox than the Orthodox when it came to observance and practicing?
You have a problem. You have a farm. In the farm, you have all kinds of problems. You have to solve them, or you have to give up on it. Mm-hmm. Rabbi Kook believes that you can use non-Jews to solve all these problems, of Shabbat problems, Saturday problems. But this solution was not practical many times, and it didn't fit the feeling of the religious Zionism. They believe that they want to be on their own and not dependent on non-Jews to do all these kind of things, like milking the cows on Saturday and this kind of thing. So Rabbi Kook is very problem to explain how and what was his real position.
But later his theories or his ideas really took over religious Zionism, and is today, as I said, in the past 4 or 5 decades, is by far the most influential modern Orthodox rabbi in the 20th century.
No question about it. First of all, he had the yeshiva of his, and he raised a whole generation of yeshiva bucherim who later became leaders of the religious Zionism. Religious Zionism didn't have another yeshiva to educate these people. But also what happened later...
Which is funny, because you said they were so focused on education, and they ended up neglecting this aspect of education that turned out to be crucial.
They had a basic education, they have high schools, but not yeshivot. Mm-hmm. But what happened later on, it's not only a situation of institutions, it's also a problem of situations that happened after the Six-Day War, and there's another issue.
It's a whole different matter. It took even a more nationally oriented route. But we'll leave it there. Professor Yosef Salmon, historian of Judaism at Ben-Gurion University and author of Do Not Provoke Providence, Orthodoxy in the Grip of Nationalism, that just appeared in English by Academic Studies Press. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you.